cycle in London for 5 years now. In that time, nearly 80 people have been killed. That was me on television in Britain, where I'm from, basically accusing the Mayor of London and creating headlines. How on earth did that happen? Like most people, I feel nervous in front of a camera. I'll let you in on a secret. I feel a little bit nervous now, in fact. But I'm going to argue to you today that mastering the media is important, and it's an important skill that anyone can do, as opposed to some sort of abstract, dark art. My name is Mark Ames, and I run a company called Strategic Cities, and we specialise in community engagement, communications and media management, really helping cities to bring about difficult change. And I have quite unusual experience. I've worked in the media, and as you just saw, I've been a subject of the media too. And I want to explain how, from that point of view, you can really get things done even when the media environment turns hostile. It's really fantastic to be here in Arnhem-Nijmegen for such a phenomenal conference. It's great to learn from the best, and I'm always amazed at the projects that the Dutch deliver to accommodate their cyclists. But I want to share with you a little bit of a secret. I come here a lot, and whenever I do, I experience a tiny sense of frustration, because I talk to planners, I talk to engineers, I talk to politicians, and I say, how did you do this? And they look at me as if I'm crazy and say, well, of course, we just did it. Outside of the world's #1 country for cycling, things are a little bit different. This is London. Doesn't that look safe? An environment. What I'm really asking those Dutch planners and those Dutch politicians is, how did you convince your citizens that it's okay to disrupt their lives in order to build this project? And I ask that because if you're like me, and especially if you're from an English-speaking country, you will have a popular press where you live that has the power to ensure that plans don't always go smoothly. Well, today I'm going to tell you a story about how London, the most unlikely cycling city in the world, went from looking something like this to something like this. We only achieved change in London by having a very public discussion about the role of London's streets. And this was done in pages of newspaper articles, hours of radio interviews, and coverage on the television, websites, and on web blogs. And without that work in the media, that change that you just saw would not have been possible. Who went to Amsterdam yesterday? Oh, fantastic, most of you. Did you have a good time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, me too, me too. Well, if you're feeling, shall I say, a little bit fuzzy this morning, my apologies. I am going to cram quite a lot into the next few minutes. So if you miss anything, please don't worry. Feel free to continue the conversation outside of this room. Come and see me or reach me online via email, hello@strategic-cities.com, or on Twitter @strategiccities. Okay, let's go. So, how does the media work, and why is that relevant to you? The most important thing I would like you to understand is that news doesn't happen, it's chosen. The coverage that you see every day on the news is not organic. It's been carefully selected, crafted and filtered, and it presents a particular worldview. This gentleman is Alfred Lord Northcliffe, who was the founder of the famous British newspaper, the Daily Mail. He was extremely successful and extremely influential, and Alfred understood most of all that news doesn't happen, it's chosen. He famously instructed all of his reporters, get me a murder a day, because he understood that to sell the most newspapers, he had to have the most salacious, the most juicy headlines. News is chosen to fit a commercial imperative. This way of marketing the news can also be seen in headlines about people who ride bikes. The more outrageous they are, the more people read the headlines, the more money the media owner makes. Here's a 2009 Daily Mail headline calling cyclists iPod-wearing zombies. And I've even seen a headline from here in the Netherlands calling mothers who ride cargo bikes a sign of Satan. Being outrageous about cyclists is always a popular view, and that's because it taps into the worldview of a lot of readers and grabs their attention. If you don't believe me, let me show you a few more examples. In the UK, newspapers have called cyclists by a number of interesting names: lycra louts, bad cyclists, biking supremacists, aggressive morons, and even the cycling Taliban. This is not by accident. The more extreme the headline, the more papers the newspaper sells. Or in the 21st century, the more clicks the article generates. In London, the relationship between the cycling community and London's famous black cab driving lobby reached a new low, when the taxi leader called cyclists the ISIS of London. That's not very nice. But by coming out with a statement like this, you are more likely to attract attention and generate headlines. Sadly, this is how the news agenda is set today. Outrageous articles can travel a long way, sometimes unintentionally, but often swaying public opinion. Here's an example from Australia, where I live and work at the moment. We hit headline gold when a vegan cyclist was filmed screaming at a driver. It's like playing bingo, talk about jackpot. The video of the screaming vegan cyclist was taken from the internet for free and attracted attention and a lot of clicks for news.com.au, for 9.com.au, a news channel in Australia. Spotting a lucrative story when they saw one, news.com.au stole their content and also ran the story about the vegan cyclist. And Daily Mail Australia got in on the act and finished it in perfect clickbaity fashion with "Who is at fault?" This demonstrates that one small story can travel a long way via syndication and copying, and sometimes the original content, in this case the video that was taken from the internet for free, is syndicated by so many news channels it generates thousands of views and therefore revenue for the person who owns that IP, the person who filmed the video in the first place. That's really interesting. And keeping that in mind, I'm going to show you a short, slightly disturbing video. Most cyclists have been in that situation, right? It's not very nice. But what if I was to tell you that actually this is in fact fake news? The girl on the bike, the misogynistic men in the van, the motorbike rider are all actors. This video is staged. Do you remember how I explained to you how news can be shared and syndicated so much that it generates revenue for the person who uploads the video in the first place? Well, that's exactly what happened here. Some clever London creatives concocted the video, uploaded it to YouTube, shared it on their social media channels, stood back and watched as hundreds of news websites shared their story, thinking that it was genuine. It was a perfectly concocted recipe for generating clicks, cyclists, road rage, misogyny, and one kick-ass girl. And it was viewed hundreds of thousands of times before anyone even questioned whether it might be real. So, That's how the commercial media environment works today, and that's why we see so many attention-seeking headlines about cyclists. The primary purpose of commercial media is to generate revenue, to make money. In order to do this, it carefully curates content to attract the most attention. And there are even people out there creating content in order to cash in on that process. Who knew when you watched the evening news that the background was so complicated? That's commercial news. But what about serious news coverage on real subjects, like, for example, the death of cyclists or attempts to build infrastructure? You guys, cycling officers, activists, engineers, planners, politicians, you must understand how the media works, and you must be prepared to participate in that process if you want to achieve change. The media where you live is important. Newspapers, television, radio, and the internet help to spread information about the projects that you're going to build. The media acts as a barometer of public opinion, and the media also helps your community to understand why change and disruption might be necessary. Politicians will tell you they do not like upsetting their constituents, and they dislike media coverage of them upsetting their constituents even more. Constituents, voters, are the currency of politicians, and they don't like losing voters, even really badly misinformed voters. These Londoners were protesting against a plan to create safe space for cycling in a North London community. It was a highly contentious project. It saw protests both in favour and also against. And protests are usually, of course, covered by the media, so negative protests lead to negative media coverage. Janet Sadiq Khan, New York City's former transportation commissioner, identified and defined this phenomenon as a media backlash. She is responsible for pedestrianising Times Square and delivering hundreds of kilometres of bike lanes in New York. And she said, any time you take on the status quo, it's going to be a fight, and the status quo is going to push back hard. Everyone in this room, of course, wants healthy, active, sustainable communities. We are not like everybody else. Trust me, the status quo does not go down without a fight. Sadiq Khan was speaking from bitter experience. She endured a protracted and bitter legal action that went on for 5 years. 5 years against one bike lane. The protesters' concerns? A change to the status quo, disruption to their car parking. Excuse me, sorry. That court case provided 5 years of content for the New York media to cover, who followed the story intently. And this example shows you why it's really important to create a media plan. Protest can be a useful tool, and that was certainly the case with changing hearts and minds in London. It's visual, and it adds a human face to technical discussions. In London, protests and rallies were used to draw attention to the demands of the cycling community. These protests gave television journalists something visual to broadcast and images to fill the pages of newspapers. This is important because our media outlets have hours of airtime and acres of newspaper pages to fill every single day. Visual content goes a long way. Mark, I think you're in this video somewhere. So, what about where you live and work? What about your projects? How will you achieve change if the media environment turns hostile? I'm going to give you some tips and suggestions on how you can use the media to your advantage. And don't worry, I will summarise them at the end. So let's imagine your theoretical city wants to build a cycle highway. It means spending millions, removing car parking spots, and digging up streets. On the plus side, it could also hugely increase cycling capacity in your city. So you need a media strategy. Firstly, clearly define what the opportunity is and ensure that your team understands what is at stake. Secondly, define your audience. Who do you need to persuade that this is a good idea? Is it business people? Is it politicians? Who do you need to talk to? And lastly, define the opposition. This is really important. It's important that you understand who it is you're up against. Who is your enemy? Let me give you an example from London that shows why defining the opposition is important. When we were advocating for new cycle superhighways in London, there was a lot of opposition. Anonymous briefing papers, whispers in powerful corridors, corporate lobbyists making suggestions to people's ears that were listening. But it wasn't clear who the opposition was. Where was this opposition coming from? So as campaigners, we did some digging and discovered that actually all of this opposition, these whispers in corridors, were coming from one company, the most important and powerful landowner in the City of London. You do not send cycling advocates out to argue against the most important landowner in the City of London. It just doesn't work. Also, the opposition didn't say they were opposed to cycling. They said they were opposed to cycling making it more difficult to do business in London. So we got out there and literally knocked on doors and got the CEOs of over 170 leading companies, including Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Deloitte, the Royal Bank of Scotland, even the London Opera House, to say that they supported the cycleway plans and the bikeways were important to them being able to continue doing business. And it was only by defining who the opposition was that we were able to craft this appropriate response. Who knew that it's so hot in the Netherlands? You don't come to Holland for a heatwave. Here's my next tip. Find journalists that you can work with. You should identify your local journalists and find out whether they are likely to be supportive or not. And once you've identified these influential people, you need to go out and have a cup of coffee with them. You need to meet with them and brief them about the work that you want to do. Doing this is really time-consuming, I appreciate that. But trust me, if you don't go out there and take the time to meet the journalists where you live, the opposition will. In London, we could not have achieved what we did if it was not for a handful of professional truth seekers who followed cycling stories intently and reported on them in an unbiased fashion. My next tip, you need to make sure that you construct a supplementary information network of your own. And what I mean by this is other channels for you to get your message across. In London, Twitter has been phenomenally successful for engaging people outside of the normal mainstream media. In Sydney, where I live and work now, Facebook is more popular. The platform isn't important. What is creating an alternative network that allows you to circulate information without having to rely on the traditional media system. And if your local newspaper is only interested in running negative and scandalous coverage of your stories, having an alternative network like this gives you a space to tell the truth in your own words without fear of being misrepresented. Here's another tip, and as cyclists, I think it's really important that we tune into this one. When you're talking about your projects publicly, you need to expand the scope of your project's appeal so that it's interesting to more than just cyclists. Because sadly, the only people who care about cycling are cyclists. And in your city, that's probably quite a small group. Talking only in terms of benefits to cyclists is not helpful. Now, the wonderful thing about more people riding bikes is that it creates an intersection of multiple policy benefits. So, don't only talk about what is good for cyclists, talk about what is good for your city, talk about what is good for tourists, talk about creating a better city for children or for older people. Talk about a more efficient road network, making it easier for drivers. These themes are of interest to a lot more of your citizens than just cycling, and it will help to attract a much wider group of support to your project. Next tip, number 5, be a reliable source of news. As I mentioned, editors have pages of coverage and hours of airtime that they have to fill with stories every single day. I don't envy them their task. So if you're building a new cycleway, don't wait until that cycleway is finished to send one press release that says, ta-da, we've finished, because really you're only making one opportunity for yourself. If you're a reliable source of news all the way through every stage of your project, you can get a lot more support and stories out there. Be somebody who can help those editors and get them on side by filling that space quickly and cheaply. And you'll be amazed how many stories one project can generate. Perhaps you are training some special apprentices as part of your project. Well, that's a story. Maybe you've imported a special piece of Dutch equipment that builds cycle parks. Well, that's a story. Maybe when you're digging the cycle lane, you find some fascinating historic archaeology underneath a car park. That's also a story. If you make sure that these stories are out there every single time, you'll get a lot more coverage, you'll be seen more favourably by the editors, and in turn you'll be seen positively by their readers. Here's my final, and I would argue my most important tip. You must take control of your image and of your words. If you appear on television, or if you have your photograph taken, make sure you look the part. Wear something neutral, without distracting messages on it. You know, brush your hair, be professional. I'll give you an example. I once watched a television interview with a cycling campaigner who had an anti-oil t-shirt on. And I spent the entire interview thinking about oil and polar bears rather than cycling, which is what he was talking about. Don't throw away your opportunities. Don't distract your readers. Make sure that it is your words and not some element of your image that is the focus of your interview. And also, try to think through the lens of a camera and how you're going to look inside of it. Like, as I mentioned, we all feel uncomfortable in front of cameras, but it's important that you understand how your image can be manipulated. So beware photographers to ask you to stand in a certain place or in a certain way, because who knows what might be going on behind you. And this is a really interesting example. Here I am in 2011, slightly heavier, still with dark hair, happy days. And this is on Blackfriars Bridge across central London, where there was a really significant protest on the bridge calling for more safe space for cycling. And the cameraman wanted the inevitable traffic jam, which is always in London anyway, it was nothing to do with us, there's always traffic jams in London. He wanted the traffic jam to be the background while I was speaking, and I wanted my words and not congestion and negative consequences to be the focus. So what we did is we got him to swing the camera around, so that as I was talking, it was London's really passionate and dedicated cycling community who were my backdrop, rather than angry taxi drivers. I've had enough of them, quite frankly. Yeah, pay attention where they point the camera and control your image. You also need to control your words. Journalists might try and trick you with your own words. It's not very nice, but it happens. So when you go into an interview, be mindful about how what you say might be edited or might be twisted. You might say in an interview, we have to have a conversation about why some drivers hate cyclists and cyclists hate drivers. Well, that's a valid statement to make. But imagine after that interview, the journalist goes away and starts thinking about what to do with your words. Perhaps they could make them shorter. Perhaps they could only publish a little part of your quote. And perhaps they could even make a headline that makes your words sound like they mean something totally different to what you actually meant. You must be careful. And if all else fails, just remember this fantastic quote by Andrew Gilligan, the former Mayor of London's cycling commissioner. Andrew delivered the first separated cycleways through central London, which of course is not without challenges, so he should know. And he said there will always be a very vocal, very loud minority of people who genuinely, passionately believe their lives are going to be ruined because they have to wait 10 minutes in traffic. What I think Andrew is trying to tell you is, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. You can't keep all of the people happy all of the time. Well, that vocal mad minority, I just say that out loud. No, that vocal minority, you don't need to worry about them because you're never going to change their minds. That's just the way that civic discussion works. There's voices for and there's voices against. They are the extremes. What you're after is this sort of floating amoeba-like blob in the middle, which is, you know, the majority of people, which can float one way or the other. Make sure that they float your way. Don't try and change the minds of the people who are speaking out against you. We're almost out of time, so here's those 6 top tips once again. Number 1, define the opposition, the audience, and the opportunity. 2, identify friendly journalists. Build an alternative network. Expand your project's appeal. Be a reliable source of news. And control your image. These tips really do only scratch the surface of media management techniques, but I hope that they will help you if you find your work is coming under media scrutiny. If journalists are calling you up, if angry citizens are picketing your office, don't panic. You're not the first person to have experienced this, and tools like this can help you to achieve change, even in a hostile media environment. And if you follow them, you'll already be on your way to success. In London, it was a very long and a very difficult public battle, but it was worth it. Today, even in the dark, even in the rain, the outcomes have been spectacular, and so many more people are now riding. It has the potential to change the city. London had to have this public discussion played out on television, played out on radio, and so that everyone understood why change was necessary. Winning that public discussion took the skills and tools that you can use too. So I would encourage you to learn them, take them home back to your own cities, and together we can all achieve change. Thank you very much.
I'm very, very impressed simply because I'm doing the same stuff, except I get money from my customers. So you've been really, really successful in by coming here, getting the best advice possible. Now, it's already time up. That doesn't mean that we can't have a last drink, which means also we can have a last question. Yesterday I had an audience in front of me that definitely wanted to ask questions. So my question to you is, anybody for grabs, anybody wanting to get their question answered very quickly? I'll come down to you. I'll just decide that we have 2 people who can ask questions. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, sir. And you're already at the side, so I can actually come to you.
Can you get up and tell us who you are?
Okay, hello, my name is Marko, I come from Serbia. So